Hi, in this video I'm going to talk about user value input through scripting in Modo. As a basis, I again have taken a video tutorial by Keith. So when you go to, and I've selected the wrong one, to the YouTube, yes, it's really Keith. He has a playlist with scripting tutorials, but he also has older tutorials which are also very good, and I suggest to check them out. And one of these videos is this one, Python and Modo a choice, and the code he uses in that video is the basis for my code. And first let me clear everything, clear the log, clear the output window, and I'm okay. So I have a couple of items in the item list. They are all just empty mesh layers, and right now mesh 3 has been selected. And when I run my code, then I get a pop-up with choices, and when I select, for instance, mesh 4, press OK, you see now in the item list mesh 4 has been selected. Now this is something that Keith demonstrates in his video. In the video that I am creating for my own reference, I'm actually going to discuss how he actually sets everything up, and going to the wiki and just showing a couple of tips and stuff that I want to remember myself when I ever have to redo something like this again. So the main code is actually a call to a function called allSceneItems, and when I go to that function, so it does a query scene service item.n question mark, so I will get the total number of items in the scene and store it in a variable called allit, and then I'm going to loop, and I'm going to check alex.eval query scene service item.type label and question mark %s. So I'm going to loop by index and ask if it equals to type mesh, and if so, I'm going to create a string, and I'm going to add to it, so plus equals, I'm going to add to it the string semicolon, and add to that the result of alex.eval of query scene service item name, and again %s for the index. So the reason why I'm adding a semicolon over here will become clearer once I've actually started to explain the code to set up a user value. So maybe I can do so already for a bit when I go to the commands and scripting in commands.pdf. This is also being discussed in the wiki. So if you want to present the user with a list of choices, then each option in the list is separated by a semicolon. So that's why I'm creating a string of mesh items, and each of them has a semicolon. And as Keith explains and sorry about that, I'm going to stop at the moment for the video for a moment. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. I had commented out something, and so this function returns that string. When I do a printout, then you can see in the event log, so I'm going to uncomment that one. You can see then in the event log what that string, and I also get my pop-up now, of course. I'm going to cancel. So that is actually the string mesh semicolon, mesh 2 semicolon, and so on. Now Keith returns the string with square brackets, 1 colon and nothing, and square brackets, to make sure that the first semicolon is not part of the string, but as I've just checked, if I do remove that and so return the string with a leading semicolon, then actually it simply says also mesh, the semicolons are being discarded, so you do not really have to, you see in the output event log, it's exactly the same. So the string slicing, as that is called, so when you add square brackets, and I have an extra character and specify one colon, then my string will be concatenated and the first element will be removed. So this is the output of that function. This is what Keith also demonstrates. I have rewritten the code a bit, but so this function gets me a string of all the mesh items in the item list separated by a semicolon, like that. Next part in the main code is that I call a function named mf user choices, and I'm passing 3 strings in that function, and what is being returned I'm going to store in a string variable that I will discuss later what I'm going to do with that. But first of all, this is the main part of the video. So the mf.userChoices function that I've created, that Keith has created in this video, and I'm going to pass it the string choices, the string list, and then the string add choices, which is the string that is being returned by that function that I've just explained. So that is that string that will be passed into the function mf_user_choices, and I've called the parameters string user value name, string value type, string user value. So these values over here, they will be passed into this function. And this function will take care of creating a pop-up for user values. Now, a first thing that I want to draw your attention to, in previous videos about querying the command system, I have explained that every command is actually a button of some sort. So you have your file buttons in your menu. So over here, all those entries, they all are command buttons. You have your tool option buttons, so you can toggle those on and off. You have your check marks and whatnot. And when you go to the command history, to the bar underneath here, you can, for most commands, have a pop-up or something if they support pop-up. So for instance, I'm going to give you an example. When I enter tool, and I've made tool.set, and without specifying any arguments, and I press enter, then I get a pop-up for set tool. This is something that I show you in a previous video. So for tool.set, you have this pop-up. And when executing code like that without arguments, so even if there are required arguments, you can execute, for instance, like tool.set, that code without any arguments, without any required arguments, and then you get a pop-up. And you can do that also for instance, for something that I am going to explain later, the command user.def_new. So when I copy that and paste that over here, Ctrl V, and press enter, now I get a pop-up for new user value definition. This is something that I wanted to show you also. So this is something that I can use to create user values, and now it says lifespan config, so I have a choice over here to config temporary or momentary. When I set it to config, then for instance, if I were to create a user value named please delete me, of data type, for instance, string, and I set it to config and press OK. Now in my main config file there has been added a user value named please delete me. So when I, for instance, save my config, so config save, now my config is saved. When I now go to, and I don't have an Explorer window open, to my config and open my config, do a search for please delete and so on. You see now in my main config I have added a user value please delete me. So it's type string and please delete me and so on. So this can be useful if you want to add user values that you need to be persistent in your config file. Now I don't want that user value over there, so I am going to delete it. So if I do a search in commands for user.def, and then so it's user.def delete, and I have to specify the name again, so please delete me, press enter. So when I go to the commands results, you see over here the first time it said user.defNew, please delete me, that's the name of type string and of attribute config, so it will be stored in the config, success, and then user.def delete, please delete me, success. So now it should have been deleted, so I'm going to store my config again. So config save, open my config folder again, open, do a search for Control F, please delete, cannot find please delete. So it has been removed now from my config. That is something I wanted to show you about user values, that you can do it in scripts like we are going to do here, or like Keith has shown in his video, and I'm going to discuss this also here. And you can also do that through the command line, of course, like I've just shown you. So the function is called mf underscore, and I use mf as underscore as a shortcut for my function, that I know it's something that I have created myself. So mf the underscore user choices, and as said before, I'm passing the strings choices list, and then the string that has been created by the definition mf all scene items. So it's a list of all scene items separated. No, it's not a list, it's a string separated of a string of all mesh items names separated by a semicolon, as I've explained earlier. So the first important command we are going to discuss is user.defNew. So when I do a search in the commands for def new, you have user.defNew name string required, optional type string, and optional choice list config temporary or momentary, like you've seen earlier. So when I execute this line without any arguments, you see my previous values still are there. What? Oh, sorry. So when I go to commands, it's the same as this one, but now it's more vertically. So when I go to the plus, it just so the three arguments: live, type, and name. So name is the name of the user value, and so that's why I called this argument variable string user value name. And so we are going to execute user.defNew %s, so that will be that name, which is actually choices, I can of course specify something else over here. I can say please select from the list or something. So then that will be the name, but I just named the user value choices. So this will be the user value name. And its type integer and its life is momentary. So let me discuss a bit the rest of those. So I've made a few comments over here. So define a new user value and note from the docs. The list feature is useful for creating a list of choices for an integer type value. So you might think, well, I am creating a choice list of strings that I have to enter string over here. But let me show you what happens. So I'm going to comment out that line and uncomment the next one over here. That's the exact same command, user.defNew %s, type of string this time, and live momentary also, and it's this value name that's going to be the name of the user value. When I execute now the code, I get this one, so I don't get a choice list. So the type, I'm going to comment this out again and uncomment the previous line, needs to be integer with a list of choices like that. And I believe this is integer because probably the integer represents the index or the indices that you can use. It doesn't explain much in the wiki about it. It only says, so the list feature is useful for creating a list of choices for an integer type value. So you have to interpret this as not being a list of integers, but an integer type value, meaning that I believe that this will be some kind of index. And each option in the list is separated by a semicolon, as I discussed earlier. So it's okay. So this alex.eval creates my user value, and it specifies that it's only momentary. You can set it to config, then as you have seen, it will be stored in the config. You can set it to, and go back to the wiki, you can set it to temporary, and you can set it to momentary. So when it's set to momentary, then the user value will exist only until the command that spawns it returns. So that's usually what you're probably going to do in scripts. So now I have created my new user value. Now I'm going to set some attributes for it. So the next line is again an alex.eval, and this time a user.def command. And first let me explain also why there is a question, an exclamation mark in front of it, and that's also the case over here. When you execute commands like that, then modo could give you an error message if something goes wrong. If you want to make sure that no error messages are being given by modo, you can suppress them by prefixing the commands with a question, with an exclamation mark. And sometimes you need 2 exclamation marks, because sometimes commands can have sub-commands that also can trigger error messages. And if you want to suppress error messages of the main command and sub-commands, then you have to use 2 exclamation marks. So the next command that we are discussing right now is user.def. And when I go to the commands, so user.def, name string, and they're all required, the attributes. So it requires a name, it requires one of the following: username or type or list names or archetype and so on, and it requires a value. So in this line we are going to first say on what user value we are going to operate. So that is string user value name, because I've named my user value here with whatever is in string user value name. So this is the user value name we are going to operate on with this command. Then the type will be list, because I'm passing list over here. And the value will be string value, that is that one, and that comes from this variable, and that variable has been created by the function, the first function call. So that's mesh semicolon, mesh2 semicolon, and so on. So to recap, you create the user value with your user.defNew command, and then you can specify further attributes for that user value with the user.def command. And now in your code you need to call the pop-up. So like I've shown you earlier, in the commands history bar over here, if you enter a command like user.defNew without arguments and you press enter, you get your pop-up. You have to do something similar in your code in order to make your pop-up appear, and that is done with the user.value command. So in this line you have alex.eval parentheses quote question mark user.value %s, and that will be your user value name. So I'm calling the user value with name of string user value, which will be the choices user value, and I'm calling that with user.value, and it's preceded by a question mark, and this means that if somewhere you had suppressed error messages, now in this case I want to make sure there is an error message if something goes wrong. So the question mark makes sure that error messages will be shown even if elsewhere in your code you have suppressed them. So the code alex.eval user.value and name %s is actually the same as when you were to write in your code in your command history bar over here user.defNew print, and now you get your pop-up. You cannot do that with user.value like that. It would get an error of course, because you say missing required argument name. Now earlier I should have shown you this when I entered a user value into the main config, because when I had entered, please, and let me just for argument's sake create another one. So user.defNew, and I have def new, and again please delete. I'm going to call it like that, user please delete. So when I go to my command results, so success, now I can say user.value name please delete, and I get a pop-up, and now I can specify the value. So if I believe I did not specify a type, so I believe it's by default a string. So by default it's a string, and I did not set any value. And if I do not specify a value in the command bar here, if I do specify a value, for instance hello, enter, you see success. Now when I store that into my config, so config save, again I'm going to open my config and open and do a search for please d, and okay, so Now it should say, and I've forgotten what I actually entered as a value. Did I say hello? Let me do it again. I'm sorry about that. And I did close the wrong one, I think. So user dot value for please delete. I'm going to make hello world, and this needs to be in quotes, I guess, because it contains spaces. So when I enter that, please, too many arguments. So and I used single quotes, and it have to be double quotes. Voila, success. So store that into my config save, and open my config, open, Control F, please delete, and over there it says hello world. Okay, so that has been successfully done. Excuse me. And now, so you can enter values through the bar, through the command history bar. But when I now enter user dot value, and the name was please delete, and when I now do not enter a required value like hello world earlier, then I will get a pop-up, and it does contain the value that I gave it earlier, hello world, and now I'm going to replace it, for instance, with this has been replaced. So in other words, when I enter the value underneath, I do not get a pop-up. When I do not enter the required value in here, then I will get the pop-up. This has been replaced. Okay, so again, file, config save, then open the config, again Control F, and please will suffice, I think. Yes, and as you can see, this has been replaced. And of course, I'm going to now delete the user.def delete, and it was please delete, and as you can see now, user.def please delete, success. Again, store it in my config, go to the config, open it, do a search, Control F, please delete, and it's still there. Maybe I did I store it? So I'm going to pause for a moment. So sorry about that. Well, it won't let me delete. I do not know exactly what is going on, but when I do again user.value and please delete without a value in the bar to get my pop-up, now I get an error. So it failed because actually it has been deleted, that user value from the config, but apparently there still is something in the config that is named please delete. That was why I got actually when I did a search in the config, that was actually why I got a result. So it doesn't delete actually everything that is being added to the main config, but it actually is not longer available, because if I set, for instance, again the value to hello world between double quotes, it will give me an error because the argument or the user value is no longer in the config because I deleted it, but there is still an entry in the main config that contains the word please delete. So This just as a side note to show you what also I've shown you in the video commands, query in the command system, that when you enter commands like that you can actually get the pop-up, and this is useful if you're tackling a new subject for scripting like user.def new def new, excuse me, I'm a bit confused right now. So user.def new, and then you get a pop-up, and then you can explore, and in combination with your oh, you have to press okay, and in combination with your command history commands, when you do search here, then you can make more sense of it, what actually is required and what actually the commands actually do. So to recap, I have my new user value with type integer, what I believe to be indices, because if you set it to string, as shown you earlier, you don't get your choice of meshes. Live momentary, so this is my new user value. I'm going to specify that I want for that user value that I've named choices, I'm going to set it to list, and I'm going to add the list of choices that have been returned by my function allSeenItems. And as discussed earlier, I need to call the pop-up, which is done by alex.eval user.value, and then the name of the user value. And then you need to catch the result into a string variable. So I've called it string choice result and alex.eval, and then user.value, and again %h, but this time with a question mark. So here it was question mark user value, here it's user value, and then your name, which is the %s operator in this case because it needs to be dynamic, and then a following question mark. So now you are querying. Here the question mark, as explained, means I'm going to force error messages to show. Here you have to actually, and here is no question mark following, so that means I am executing the command. Now I am querying the command, so I have to add a question mark at the end. And what user value am I querying? Well, it's the one that has been passed. It's the one that I named choices by executing this line. So this line sets the user value. No, this line sets actually calls the pop-up, as I've shown you, with doing all that in the user bar. So when you enter without values, then you get your pop-up. So in code you have to do the same, and you do that by using the command user.value, and of course you have to specify the name of the user.value that you want to edit, and then you can catch that value by querying with user.value, so with a question mark. And I do a printout of that choice result. So when you go to the event log, I clear everything, I run the code, and now I only have mesh. I have a new mesh later, mesh scene, so it says mesh over here. If I add a couple of meshes now again, so I have a bigger choice list, mesh 4, okay, so mesh 4, and you see here mesh 4 has been selected. So in this, and the end of this function returns the string, so mesh 4 is being returned, and then as a last function call in my main code, I do a call to a function mfSelect mesh by ID. So my ID, sorry about that. So I do a call of select mesh by ID, and what I'm passing into it is the results of the alex.eval, and the alex.eval is the query scene service item ID, and then percentage %s for var user chose. So my var user chose is what I get back from the function mf user choices. So I passed the strings choices list and the mesh semicolon list into mf user choices. That returns the one that I selected. So when I run the code and I select mesh 3, okay, then mesh 3 is the string that is being added or passed into var user chose. And then I'm going to query scene service item ID question mark. And actually, because I did not do this in a function that needs to be dynamic. Oh no, I need the percentage %s because this needs to be a string. So percentage %s, and that's, sorry about it if it's a bit confusing. So over here I'm querying the same service with item ID question mark with the result that I got from my pop-up, and I'm passing that value into another function. So select mesh by ID, and let us select mesh by ID do. Well, you can guess it by the name. So alex.eval, and then select.item percentage %s, and then with my set my string ID. I believe that you can also omit the set argument here and then clear everything. I have to check that out, that attribute. So mesh 4, okay, so mesh 4 in the item list has been selected. So the last function over here actually makes sure that your item is being selected. So I hope it was not too confusing. So the reason that I made this video for my own reference was to make sure that I understood everything what Keith was showing in his video, and how you can use actually those commands like shown in previous videos. You can use these commands in your command history bar down below here, execute them to get a pop-up, and then you, together with what's happening here, you know that I need to go to the command history, and then I can check out everything that is required for writing code with user values. And when you go to the wiki or to the scripting and commands.pdf, you have further information about it. So user values and so on. So I just wanted to show you all this, and I hope that wasn't too confusing, because sometimes I'm not always too clear, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And I guess this was all that I wanted to say. So thank you, Keith, for all your videos about scripting in Modo. They've made life a lot easier, and I hope that people who are watching my videos with my extra comments do appreciate it. So bye for now.